But the next panel is talking about innovative learning environments. So the question is, like, how can these innovative learning environments produce the kind of results that we would like to have? So what is a powerful learning environment in the 21st century? Many technologies have been introduced, however, many of them have failed. What are the reasons for these failures? What will be the next big thing? It's a big question. So I'd like to introduce and welcome to the stage the moderator, Carla Aerts, Director of Futures at UCL Institute of Education. So Carla, thank you for being here. And she will introduce the panelists.
Hi, hello everyone. Let me introduce you to our panelists. We've got Mark Frydenberg, Director of CIS Learning and Tech Sandbox at Bentley University from the US. Evan Schiff, Product Director at Premier Global and Ascent Learning. And Tod Lockard, Chief Commercial Officer, Knowledgemotion.
Yeah.
Right. I actually would like to start this with a question to you. My question to you is, we actually feel that learning environments benefit education, but actually, do they really? So let's have a poll. Okay.
No one is voting.
Nobody voting.
Question should apps be used
so
at conferences?
obviously the wrong question. So, okay, we've got a couple of people voting.
Raise
so
your
let's
hand.
close the poll. It won't be a very significant answer, I would think. Right, let's see what the answers are. Oh, right.
How many people voted?
A 100% no. That's an interesting one. Okay, well, we'll
Who's
see
the one person who voted?
let's see what we can do about this then.
I think that's fake news.
Yeah, exactly. Good answer. Right. Okay. So, Mark, what do you think makes a successful learning environment?
I think learning environments today need to be much more personalized than before. They need to be able to adapt to the way students learn, both through the materials that they use for learning materials, as well as the spaces in which they learn. Students learn, we've been hearing all day about how interactive and learning activities help create experiences for students in learning, and creating classrooms and learning environments that are much less formal and much more interactive, that allows students to communicate with each other, are really, I think, the next, if not the current trend in learning space design. I mean, it used to be that you would go to a computer lab to connect to the internet, and now you can do that with the device in your pocket. So the students need to go to spaces where they can go and connect with each other.
Thanks, Mark. Tod, what are your thoughts
Yeah,
on this?
thank you, Carla. Briefly, I'll introduce myself. I'm Tod Lockard with a EdTech company. And I tell you that so you can appreciate my views being an optimist and a technologist. Bo Clips is an EdTech business. We invite you to come visit us up at the mezzanine level. But we represent over 2 million rights-ready video clips from over 40 of the world's most renowned brands and producers. But we make them available exclusively for education. So I echo Mark's comment back to what are we aiming to do? And it does often boil down to personalization and scaling. So the two have to work in combination if any of us have a chance of getting the right learning outcome. So with personalization, it touches on both aspects of successful and failed EdTech initiatives around student engagement to student attainment. And is the effort focused solely on one without the other, that could cause some disillusionment. But then the best results really have to cater to the full potential from learning progression. So I really believe that we all have different pathways to master topics and progression, and the technology is a key ingredient for that.
Great. Evan, do you concur with this?
No, but let me introduce myself to give the reason why. My name's Evan. I'm product director for Premio Global. I've spent the last 10 years in ed tech, mostly around implementation, and that's where I think a lot of my frustrations come in. I think the tech is there. I think some of the platforms we've seen are wonderful. If I was a student, I think they would provide the learning resources and pathway to get me there. I think the problem is the integration with the institutional level that allows teachers, administrators to use this technology to the best of their ability. I think personalization is great. You know, I think it can improve the students' learning outcomes, but I don't think that's addressing the questions of how do we get these learning platforms and environments into the schools on an institutional level necessarily.
Great, thank you. That kind of brings me to my second question to you, which is a bit of a biased question, I have to say. But I've been working in EdTech for a heck of a long time, and I'm sort of starting to think a bit more and more that maybe we aren't bringing solutions, maybe we are bringing more problems than questions. So we've got another poll to see what you think. So let's get the poll. So are learning environments bringing more of a problem rather than a solution to education? If you have a clicker and you feel so inclined, please, poll is open now. Okay, we've upped our response rate by 1. So, sorry? You should have a clicker. Yeah, you should have a clicker on your chair. Haven't you got clickers? Ah, is it on the Bizabo app? Ah, okay.
They go to the...
Okay, so I'm sorry. Those who have access to the poll, please. I can't do that. The guys in there have to do this. Yeah. Okay, so let's try and redo the poll. And can we have the URL first so people can actually...
That one up there?
Okay, so that URL, join the Q&A at...
Or we could go
Minor
low tech
hiccup.
and raise hands.
Okay, are we ready? Right. Can we try the poll again so we might have a slightly better and even answer?
We'll get 2 votes this time.
You know. Okay, so learning environments may bring more problems than solutions. What do you think? If you can click, please do. Ah, we've got increasing numbers. Fantastic. Okay, right. Let's close the poll. Okay, right. No, very good. Yes, 20%. Don't know, 33%. So quite an interesting mix of answers. So let's see what happens next. Okay, so Mark, you know, I've kind of stated that I think sometimes they bring more problems. What do you think? Do you think they bring more of a solution or a bit of both?
I should follow my panelists' practice and introduce myself since I didn't do that the first time. My name is Mark Frydenberg, and I'm the director of the CIS Sandbox, which is Bentley University's technology social learning space at Bentley University in Massachusetts, and I also teach information systems there. Now to answer your question, I think that learning environments can cause problems if we don't know what to do with them. If we introduce a new technology simply for the sake of introducing that technology without understanding how it's going to impact student learning, that's a problem. If we buy something without saying, what's the problem that we're trying to solve, what's the problem that this is going to solve, or how's this going to help us, that's a concern. We were talking a bit earlier about the increased use of virtual reality around, and at my university we just bought an Oculus that we can use with students, and they've been playing with it for a bit and they enjoy it a lot. But we realized that it's a technology that students hadn't seen before, and just like 20 years ago you would introduce somebody to a mouse because it was a piece of hardware they hadn't seen before, we need to introduce these new technologies sort of in the same way so that people can get a sense of what they do and how they work, and then they can use them for other purposes as well.
Thank you. Evan, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, and I suppose my answer would vary depending on which stakeholder group we're talking about. I think from a student perspective, they're fine. You know, we can go in there, we can access our homework, we can talk with our teacher. From a parent point of view, it also might be an excellent point to be able to go in and be able to monitor my student at lower levels. But I do think from a teacher and administration point of view, it's causing a lot of problems that are largely being ignored. You know, I think teachers see this as something that is being put upon them. They feel threatened, in my experience, that they're going to be replaced. And I've heard a couple speakers today already say in 20 years, are we going to have teachers? And I think the teachers feel that. So is it a problem for some stakeholders? Yes. Not for all, though.
Okay, Tod.
Yeah, from a technology perspective, I echo Mark's comments that focusing on a solution and developing solutions is always, you know, the best path to achieve some degree of traction and success. But in education, EdTech that really is designing products and solutions that can scale. And to borrow the marketing 3 C's, there's really 3 elements that could scale. Scale the classroom, scale the course, or scale the content. And to do it in a mass perspective could threaten a teacher if it's scaling the classroom, but for the pedagogy or the expertise, making that widely available starts to transcend geographies. So the opportunities from the technology's perspective are pulling in the capabilities outside the classroom and trying to figure out a way to make it available inside the classroom to get the right result. And as you said, there's just probably those 3 barriers that the best solutions could probably address and solve each one. The weakest ones probably wouldn't solve any of those.
Okay. We were talking a little bit earlier about sort of EdTech being often a retrofit rather than something transformative, because the EdTech is designed to kind of fit in a current educational model, and that may be part of the inherent problem with it. So, Evan, you as your experience as a teacher in the past.
Yeah,
and what are your views on that?
I couldn't agree more. I mean, in one of my last roles, we were trying to introduce a digital platform to 600 colleges around the world. And not only was there hesitancy to adopt it because is online learning as efficacious as face-to-face is, but the logistical problems of integrating with X amount different LMSs, one wanting it this way, one wanting it this way. I mean, there's so many barriers, both globally and also within London, as we were talking. I mean, one school in London is not identical to the other one in both their needs and their ability to adapt. So it's a challenge that Tod is going to have to overcome, I think.
So, Mark, do you think that's a problem of the kind of education system, or a problem of the technology, or a problem of both?
It's probably a bit of both. I mean, universities are always trying to play catch up with technology. Either you're at the front of the line, or because you are an early adopter and you want the challenge of adopting and trying something new, or you wait for somebody else to figure out the problems so you don't have to spend the time and energy to work it out yourself. Many universities, for example, will update computers in labs and on campus every 2 or 3 years, and so that means that some people could be using older versions of software for a while when the latest version has just been released and you're not going to see it for a while. I mean, even browsers, when browsers were updated, we have to check to make sure our LMS works, all the library resources work, and everything works within the new browser before we'll put that out on machines on campus for the exact same reason. And so I think part of it is not bureaucracy, but the process of making sure that you want to provide a stable computing environment for students, as well as you want to be first, or at least near the head of the line when it comes to using new technology, and that's the challenge.
Tod, you come from a different context, and obviously what your company does is very different to some of what we're talking about here. But so, as a sort of slight outsider, if I may say so, to the education system at least, what's your take on that?
Yeah, well, I'm very empathetic and sympathetic to the constraints and the structural dynamics that exist across institutions worldwide. So that's a known fact. I think we're all passionate about education because we all, love being involved and trying to make things better. Our software engineers deeply care. Our investors that back them care. Our customers care. So we all have a common drive to make advancement in any capacity. But to Mark's point, there's always this leapfrog element in technology that it's always a challenge to be on the bleeding edge versus on the leading edge versus a late adopter or a fast follower in all the various stages of technology adoption. And then the rapid acceleration of technology that's occurred definitely in the last 20 years has caused a lot of upheaval, a lot of consternation and challenge to bring into the classroom alternatives that have risen and sprung up from MOOCs to YouTubers to whatever, and how do we maintain the professional integrity of 600 campuses when chaos not chaos, but alternatives exist elsewhere.
So I was just going to say, it's a good point about that, and I think that one of the things that is missing is these kind of longitudinal studies that you can go to colleges with or any educational institutions and say, over the last 5 years, this is what we've seen. Because you're right, it's always a fight between those that want to be at the bleeding edge and they're ready to adopt anything you come up, and then there's the 90% of the others that are saying, well, show us the results, show us what you got.
And another problem is learning materials aren't ready because they're developed in beta before these products are released. And so even if you want to adopt a new operating system or a new version of a particular software package, in most cases, the learning materials to support that or the teaching materials to support that just aren't available right at the beginning.
And that's when your learners start going to information rather than knowledge, which is a completely different discussion. I'd love to come and talk to you guys about this at another time, but that's also an interesting debate because there's lots of information out there. There's not necessarily a lot of knowledge in a kind of educational context out there. So that sort of brings me to the next question about, okay, we're talking about 21st century learning environments. So what do you think are or is the next big thing? So I'd like, first of all, those who can actually participate to let us know what they think. Okay, poll is open. Yeah. Okay, we can close the poll. Aha. AI.
Interesting.
That is really interesting. Sorry. Can you see?
Yeah.
AI, the next big thing. That's very interesting.
Sorry,
because,
Mark.
because, of course, we had a field trip yesterday at the Institute of Education and UCL, where we were actually talking about AI. So that's quite an interesting thing. And actually, mobile devices comes in second place. I thought it might be somewhat the other way around.
Just curious, the people that wrote other, what was the other?
Don't know? Great, thank you. Okay, so Mark, what do you think is the next big thing, apart from not any of the things above?
I think it is all of those things above. What I'd like to see, though, more of is integration of mobile devices in the classroom setting, because so many schools have a mobile policy where you have to check your phone in at the door, you can't use it in the classroom, you have to leave it in your bag. When it would be really nice to be able to have students use the devices they have in their pockets to do the things that you're doing now, whether it's responding to polls or doing surveys, or even integrating it with printed or other online materials through the use of virtual reality or augmented reality or QR codes or something to bring that material to life. And there aren't many textbooks that have pages that you can scan with your phone to get augmented content, which would be a useful thing to do. A lot of the technologies that you saw on the screen, I think, are there's a point after which a technology catches on, and the hard part is determining when something is a fad and when it actually becomes the current big thing, and that's what we want. And I think that's what we need to find that balance so we introduce the right tools at the right time.
Okay, Tod.
I support a lot of the big data and elements of AI that do lead to personalization, less so from a student engagement point of view, but also for the attainment and the learning outcome. Because these new adaptive platforms present the promise, and hopefully the results will start to predict it, to do some interesting things. Because when I grew up, it was almost traditional that I would be scored against a normal distribution curve in class. So the bell-shaped curve has existed for a couple of centuries in education. And the promise, if I send my children to a fee-paying school, is that you'll be compressed and you won't be left behind. So with the technology and the personalization, how can we deliver that at scale with the right quality, the right efficacy, and the right progression and mastery measurements to do that to compression on a broader scale? And that excites me.
Okay, and do you still see a role for humans in that process?
Yeah, I do. I'm big on teachers. My brother's a teacher in Seattle, so
right.
There's always a role, whether it's a facilitator role or a leadership role or a expertise teacher-tutor type role. Yeah, there's going to be the human element that's going to be the quality control layer to help make that happen.
Well, I agree with our friend in the third row here. I don't think, thanks, man. I'm not convinced that any of them are the future, and I've used this example to you guys, but
that's the question.
Right, I think that. What's that?
They're the present. It's what's happening now.
Right. Exactly to that. 10 years ago, we would have said Second Life is the next big thing, now a lot of talk is about VR. I'm sure a lot of you, or how many of you have a Google Cardboard or something similar in your house? Most of you, right? How many of you use it every day? Right. So we are the champions of ed tech here, right? And we are the people that are not even using the technology that we're creating. I've got one, and it's great once every 3 months when someone comes over who hasn't used VR before and they're blown away by the technology. But I still think you need to take a step back, and the technology that's the next big thing is still just digital online learning, and it's the mentality shift that is more important than what the actual tech is in this question, I think.
Yes, because one of the things we haven't really gone into depth in is actually the whole underlying question of the pedagogy that supports all this technology. And I think with EdTech, it's easy to get slightly blinded by the tech rather than the ed. And it's kind of bringing that cohesion between the two. That's, I think, the biggest challenge for both educators and the EdTech players to make that happen. Mark?
And the concern is also that today's students are assumed that they have mastery of these devices. That they assume that they grew up with them, that they know how to use them, but they may not know how to use them efficiently or responsibly.
Also, our findings are that actually when it comes to learning environments, that suddenly students don't know how to use technology at all, which is, and maybe not so much in higher ed, but certainly in secondary education, somehow the use of technology goes completely out of the window, because when you're looking at the context of learning, it's actually very different than the context of using technology outside of the classroom.
They're tech savvy, but they're not literate. And
exactly.
And that's the concern.
Exactly, yeah.
They're not technology literate.
Yeah. Okay, so that's, gosh, we're making up time, very good. Right, I would like to have a final question, which is, learning environments actually will bring solutions rather than problems. Okay, yeah, we can close the poll, I think. Aha, we've had a bit of a mood swing, except of course the first question and the second question weren't perhaps very representative, given that some people didn't have the URL. So it's interesting to see that there is still a belief in learning environments, and that learning environments are meant to bring solutions. How do you think, Evan, a learning environment will kind of, we talked about an amalgamation of lots of things, but actually how will that translate into a teacher's or a learner's kind of existence, or, because...
Great question. If I had the answer, I'd start a company. But I think one of the things that's been encouraging about the last couple days, and especially spending time with the folks from TESS who are focused on teachers and creating that social network with teachers, and I think what's really interesting about that learning environment is they're creating a resource space so the teachers have more time to be able to engage with the learning environments that might be in their schools. So I think what's going to happen eventually is as teachers get more time because of the social circles that they're in, providing them with resources, they'll be able to spend more time and dedicate that to understanding and implementing some of the benefits of these learning environments. Because despite what I've said for the last half hour, I believe in it. I just think it needs to start, it can't start from the tech. I thought you put it very eloquently. We often forgot about the ed in tech. And I think bringing that back in, which some people are doing, is a really good place to start.
Mark, you said something earlier on about the collaborative aspect of this, and for me, some of the real strength in EdTech going forward is actually that kind of social fabric that it can also bring to education, that a lot of learning solutions have actually totally ignored because they were focusing on the management rather than actually on the learning and the fabric. You know, education is a social activity, and we can't ignore that, no matter how much technology we throw at it. So from your perspective, do you see the kind of future of a learning environment sort of hinging around a new version of social media rather than you know, current solutions available?
I think that learning environments will continue to be more social and more collaborative, because that's not only driven by the way students learn, that's driven by the skills that the marketplace wants from the students who use them when they graduate. We know that being able to work as members of teams or even international teams is a key skill that employers are looking for, and it's our job as teachers to create those kinds of learning scenarios for students to participate in when they're in the classroom, so we can simulate that so they'll be ready to take their places as knowledge workers when they graduate.
How do you see that in your context? Because obviously you could be a traditional resource provider that's very clever, has got, you know, highly sophisticated curation around your resources to kind of support maybe even a personalized learning path. But in terms of the social context in which your resources can reside, how would you see that?
Yeah, Carla, it's a great question, because to get adoption, to Evan's point earlier, the implementation with teachers means the platform still has to have ease of use and intuitiveness to really be embraced and adopt. And then looking forward on the pathway to jobs, from my perspective, the technology is providing rich, diverse opportunities for collaborative use of mixed media in amongst a structured syllabus or piece of courseware. And then from a global perspective, with the scalability and just the access to the wealth of information that exists worldwide, the ability to deliver that seamlessly, whether it's an online learning platform or it's a virtual experience that's embedding the opportunity to get a taste or a sensation of an external environment, whether it's just a virtual field trip or it's something in a workplace environment in a factory in Osaka, right? Those type of technology experiences are leading back to the pathways that should better equip those learners to enter whatever they want to do post-formal education.
What I found really great about talking to you all was actually that the future is for EdTech and education is a big question mark. And it's up to all of us and the educators and the researchers and to kind of really collaborate around that question mark to come up with the new solutions. I don't think anybody in this room can say, we know what to do. It's a kind of, which makes it so interesting, it's a kind of journey of trying to figure out how to make this work. And it's a complex journey, but that's really the excitement about it. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for joining the panel. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Carla.